Well, hi everyone. I'm loading up our slides here, and I hope you're all doing pretty well this morning. We are going to spend a few minutes here today talking about gratitude. So, obviously, this is fitting given that we're coming into Thanksgiving, but I think it's also fitting as a response to our last unit on grief that in cases of trauma where people come out safely, as we all have, um, there's often an overflow of gratitude. There's this tremendous feeling in our lives of being blessed, of being thankful for our situation and things like that. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and why gratitude is such an important feature in our interpersonal communication and how we can really practice that well in this season. So let's start out talking through some of our purpose for today. So I want to talk through, first of all, what gratitude is. How does it kind of manifest in the research? What's the formal definition? Things like that. I want to talk about what gratitude does for us. So, why does it matter? What outcomes in our lives are going to be really important because of the experience of gratitude? And then finally, I want to talk about how we practice it well. How do we communicate it well? How do we develop it so that we have maximal benefit in our lives and in the lives of other people? I'm going to turn a little bit here so that we have better lighting. Okay. Lecturing from my couch is really an interesting experience. Okay. That's a little better. All right. So, what is gratitude? I A lot of us kind of think that we understand what gratitude is because it's a feeling that we feel often, but there's different forms of it. So let's kind of break that down a little bit and see what we get. All right, so gratitude, importantly, is an emotion. It's considered a positive emotion, and it most importantly results from the perception of a benefit. So a formal definition that I like to use is that gratitude is the positive emotion that occurs from the perception that one has benefited from and this is an important part, from the costly, the intentional, and the voluntary act of another person. So it's not just like, oh, I've received a benefit. We aren't likely to feel grateful for something unless we realize that what we've received cost the giver something significant. If we know that they did it out of the goodness of their own heart and not because of something that they absolutely had to do. So they weren't forced to do this act of goodness, and that it was intentional, meaning they did it on purpose. So sometimes people can do things for us kind of, and we accidentally benefit from it. And very often we're not inclined to feel particularly grateful. So when we feel grateful, it's for those things that we've received a benefit, and that benefit was costly, voluntary, and intentional on the part of the other person. Gratitude is considered a virtue. It's considered a moral affect. So, affect is another word for a sensation or kind of leading toward emotion. So, we have a sensation and then we perceive and categorize it, and it becomes an emotion. But so, affect is that kind of initial sensation. And it's moral in nature, which means that when it's used, it has moral implications. That gratitude, and this is one of my favorite things about gratitude, our gratitude elicits gratitude in other people. So when we practice gratitude, it actually helps other people practice it, which then in turn helps other people practice it, and other people practice it. So it kind of has this, it spreads. It's infectious in some respects. So when we talk about a virtue, what we're talking about is a character trait. That gratitude exists both as a trait and a state in our lives, but a virtue is something that we can cultivate, that we can have a discipline in, and that positively marks our identity as a person. So gratitude can be, as I said, a trait, like a characteristic of who we are that we experience often. So most of us know those people in our lives who are just naturally really, really grateful. They're very thankful for the things in their lives. It can also be a state. So that's a temporary feeling or experience of gratitude. And it can be a mood where kind of you go through a longer phase of just feeling really grateful. So many of us right now might be in a grateful mood. It's longer than a short term like moment of gratitude. So over the next few weeks, we might experience more gratitude because of various things going on in our lives. So one of the things that is overlooked a lot in gratitude research anyway is that it is a practice and it is a communicative practice in nature. We don't just feel gratitude. We do often, but gratitude's power is really cut off if all we're doing is feeling it. If we, on the other hand, are communicating it and sharing it, that's where those moral implications, where the virtue component of it really comes into play. So the saying of gratitude, the speaking it out, is often overlooked when we look at the benefits. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So, where does gratitude come from anyway? There's a few different arguments in research as to kind of why we as humans experience gratitude in the first place. Um, One of the places that it comes from my view, is that there's a biblical mandate for it, that um, give thanks is littered all over the Bible. That phrase, give thanks, for God is good, all those things. It's littered all over the Psalms. We see in 1 Thessalonians 5:18 the verse, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And it's modeled for us by Jesus. So Jesus verbalizes thanks before meals. He gives thanks before he raises Lazarus from the dead, etc. There's a lot of modeling of gratitude in the Bible. So if you're a Christian, then it's something that hopefully is flowing from the experience of faith in your life. But we might also look a little bit farther back. Why is it that humanity is inclined toward gratitude in the first place? So there's some argument that part of God's plan within evolutionary selection has to do with gratitude. So there's a researcher named Trivers who argues that gratitude is evolutionarily selected from, among other traits, to regulate our response to altruistic acts. So when someone does something altruistic and we're the receiver of it, gratitude helps to encourage that person. So there's another question about where altruism comes from, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if gratitude is that emotion in response to this sort of cost and benefit analysis in our lives, then we weigh what we should be thankful for, what we shouldn't be. And researchers have noted that gratitude is cross-cultural. It is something that shows up in most cultures. It's linguistically universal. So all cultures have a way of expressing thanks. Some cultures have many ways of expressing thanks. And so given that universality, scholars suggest that it's something that's evolved really independent of language, that it's non-verbally universal, it's linguistically universal. And so we think that it's been really existent in human behavior throughout time. That certain nonverbal communication behaviors like a handshake or a hug, those can absolutely be used to express gratitude. And that if that's the case, then what they think is that gratitude developed really with some of our earliest human behaviors to increase our trust in third parties. So imagine that you are sort of in a tribal community. This is like pre-civilization. And there's another person from another tribe that comes in and offers some good, some service. And you're kind of like, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you even here? Are you a threat? So in kind of early times, that would have been one of the major questions is, are you a threat? But this person does something by way of demonstrating goodwill. And the other person, you in this circumstance, are meant to receive that well. And so gratitude is something that we've evolved to develop in our hearts so that we can bond to people who are outside of our immediate circumstance. Think about it this way. Of the people who are in your immediate circle in your lives, your parents, your siblings, I know you're grateful for them in an abstract sense, but on a day to day basis, do you really experience the gratitude that maybe you should for your parents' support? Or do you kind of take it for granted because they're your family members? Most people over time take for granted those people who are closest to us. We take for granted the fact that our parents are maybe helping us with college, or that when we go home, mom's going to make our favorite meals. Like we just sort of assume that that's going to happen, but we don't assume that from other people. So, and that's in part going back to that definition of gratitude, that it's voluntary, it's costly, and it's intentional. We sort of think that from our family members, the things that they do for us isn't really all that voluntary. It's like they kind of have to do it. But with other people, we do see it as being voluntary. They don't have to be kind to us. So when they are, we really feel that in some significant ways. So researchers are saying, look, over time, we needed the ability to bond to people outside of our immediate family circle. And so when a person doesn't have a lot of familiarity with someone in a third party, then gratitude is a way to sort of expand the social circle, to gain more resources that help us to survive, that help us to thrive, really. So there's this sort of neo-Darwinian conclusion from this approach that gratitude evolved to assist social exchange, to assist bonding and attachment, and really to help keep the human race alive and prosperous. And if you look at that in combination with this sort of biblical mandate, I believe that gratitude is one of the things that makes us in to be made in the image of God, that gratitude is part of that, that this is part of the character of God. And that when we experience it, we're experiencing a little bit of the heart of God. So we can see that in, okay, I've already went through some of this. Sorry, I didn't click through this, but just to give you kind of a little bit of a note basis for that. So again, cross-cultural existence, linguistic universality, and nonverbal universality helps us to see that maybe this was an evolutionary progress. So what does gratitude then help us with? Social exchange. So as I was saying, with that, social exchange would be like the you give me something, I get something back. In relationship, bonding, attachment, etc. So, outcomes. What happens when we're expressing gratitude, when we're feeling gratitude on a regular basis? So, there's a number of health outcomes that are really important here. One of them is that people who are highly grateful experience less depression and less anxiety, in part because gratitude helps us see that we are not in total control of our worlds, and that we need other people in our lives. And when we can accept that and lay down some of the control, anxiety helps to diminish. And from there, we feel less alone, and depression starts to diminish, and so on. People who are highly grateful have better quality sleep. So some people practice gratitude before they go to sleep by doing a gratitude journal. People who have high gratitude levels tend to report having a stronger immune system, meaning that they get sick less frequently. And then when they get sick, they recover faster. So there tends to be lower blood pressure. People tend to be less bothered or complain less about aches and pains as they age. They tend to be more optimistic. They tend to be more connected relationally. And then overall, just they report higher levels of well-being. And that looks like a lower frequency of cancer for people who are highly grateful. They tend to have a better survival rate from cancer. They tend to lead longer lives. And in those long lives, they tend to have less physical decline. So they're more physically capable over the course of a longer life. So that's huge. Now, it's not to say that gratitude does all of those things. It's really possible that people who are experiencing high levels of gratitude are people who are in somewhat privileged positions in the world, and that the access to medical care and the access to friendships and the access to leisure time is part of what sort of mediates the relationship here between gratitude and physical wellness. But nonetheless, we also find that gratitude has powerful effects within impoverished communities as well. That people who are in those circumstances tend to be more creative and find more and more diverse ways of climbing out of those circumstances. So that's kind of an interesting thing to add into that puzzle. Um, okay, relational outcomes. So, as I was saying before, we do tend to be less thankful for those who are related to us. That's a natural thing. Some of that is just, again, because we feel safe with those people and we know and we trust that they love us and that they're caring for us. So we don't, again, we lose track of the voluntary nature of that. And I can see that, right? There's part of me as a mom that, I take care of my kids sometimes because I have to, not because I really, really, really want to read yet another book or sing yet another song. I do that because um, it feels like my job sometimes. And I have to say, I enjoy doing it more when I come at it from a position of this is what I want to do for my kids because I love them and I want to bless them. So I enjoy it more. And I think when I enjoy it more, they tend to enjoy it more. And then the gratitude occurs. So you can kind of see a little bit of a cycle with that. So, one of the things that's really important here is that, and I said this a little bit ago, but when we're thankful for another person, they're more likely to be thankful for you. So, when I sit down and I go, it is a privilege to sing my kids to sleep tonight. It's not blocking me from my other more important work. This is my important work. When I go into that and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be with them, they are more likely to be thankful for me. So think about it this way. If you have, let's say within your relationships with your parents, I bet that when you went home for this break, that you were really grateful to see your parents, that you were so thankful for them. I would venture to guess, and maybe not in every case, but probably a little bit more than usual. And my bet is that your parents responded to that, that you're probably more likely to be really feeling each other right now, like feeling some peace and enjoyment. Now, it could be the reverse. You might have come home with a lot of anxiety, and that rubs off too, sort of in the same direction. But often when we can change or reframe our position into gratefulness, it clicks for the other person into that mode too, which then helps bring about more closeness, more commitment, more likelihood to say, gosh, I am so thankful for that person and I really want to do things for them. I really want to commit to making our relationship good, to working on things, which means then that people who have higher levels of gratitude in their relationship tend to report better conflict. Now, that doesn't mean less conflict. It means better conflict. It means that you're doing it with more respect, with more compassion, with more care. You're listening better. And we'll talk about conflict when we get back to campus. But those are really important things that we approach, let's say, our arguments with each other a little bit differently when we can look at our partner or we can look at our parents or we can look at our loved ones and say, I'm so frustrated with you, and I am so thankful that you're in my life. Think about how different that would change things for you. Um, so, also additionally, we do find in research with caregiving and other things that people who are experiencing gratitude in their relationship tend to divide up the labor in their relationship more equitably. So, if I'm creating what I call an economy of gratitude, I should say not me, but Arlene Hochschild is a researcher who talks about an economy of gratitude in the household. That if for everything that my husband does around the house, if I'm really consistent in saying, hey, babe, thanks for taking care of this thing. I really appreciate that you help with that stuff and that, you just do it. And if he's also returning that to me, we are more likely to help each other, to serve each other, and to end up balancing the amount of work that we have at home in a better way than if it's like, well, you do your thing and I do my thing, and neither one of us is particularly grateful for the other person's thing. So, we do see across marriages and household situations like family caregiving that if gratitude is existent, that labor tends to be divided up a little bit better. Oh, this is kind of an old slideshow. My dissertation was on gratitude, so I guess I can talk through this for a second. Um, basically, so my dissertation was on family caregivers and their siblings. So family caregivers are people who are caring for an aging parent. And a lot of people do that with a sibling. So the sibling helps, like maybe full time, or they are sort of in and out of the picture depending on the family story. I would venture to guess that your parents are going through this right now. So I studied that sibling relationship. How did siblings manage this experience of caring for a parent together with gratitude in mind? Like, how did gratitude affect their conflict? How did it affect their relationship satisfaction? How did it affect their division of labor? Things like that. So, what I found was that people who were higher in gratitude also had higher feelings of closeness to their siblings. So they reported being feeling more intimately connected to them. Now, that could go either way, right? That if you're more intimate with someone, you might be more likely to be grateful for them. But equally, if you're grateful for someone, that can also develop intimacy. So that's a little bit of a loop as well. If we found that, it wasn't we, I found that if someone was receiving gratitude, that they were significantly more likely to offer it. I found that people who frequently expressed gratitude to their sibling also experienced a lot more positive well being. So, those reports of feeling happy with their life, feeling healthy, feeling energetic, feeling like they had something to offer to the world. And then I also looked at something that I called quality gratitude. So we know when people express gratitude to us and they're kind of saying it out of obligation rather than a real sensation. High quality gratitude is really well expressed. Like it's really addressing that voluntary, intentional, and costly nature of someone's service to them. And so we found, I say we because I worked with my advisors on this, but the study was mine. So I found that higher quality gratitude predicted less negative emotions. So if someone in your life is really speaking gratitude to you in a way that shows that they understand what you did, that person who's receiving that gratitude is less likely to feel really less sadness, less depression, less anxiety, all kinds of things. So it has a really positive impact. So we were talking about that in terms of like siblings who are trying to encourage perhaps the primary caregiver and their family for their parent, that if they're really able to say, hey, thank you so much, this means so much to me, I see how much work you're putting in, I see all the doctor's appointments that you're going to, I see the medication management, the insurance management, all of that stuff, and I so appreciate how well you're taking care of mom or dad, then the caregiver and the person offering the gratitude are less likely to experience negative emotion. And then that quality of gratitude also predicts relationship satisfaction, which means that that relationship satisfaction, that the way that they appreciate each other, the way that they're good with their relationship is improved when we offer that level of good gratitude. And then we also found that role. So in this case, whether or not you were the sibling affected the perceived frequency of gratitude expression. So um, the siblings, well, how can I explain this? Um, Basically, if you are the primary caregiver, you are perceiving less frequent gratitude expression. And we, excuse me, I talked about this in my dissertation as being something that has to do with the fact, with an idea called caregiver burden, that when we experience heavy stress in our lives, and in this case, caregivers carry so much burden for the well-being of another person, that has an effect of blocking our perception of gratitude. So, or our perception of gratitude expression. So let's say right now you're in a really stressful place, and maybe your parents are trying to appreciate you, care for you. The stress that you're feeling effectively blocks your perception that they are expressing those good things. And instead, what you see is kind of the negative stuff that might exist in the relationship. So that stress factor is really pivotal. So just something to consider. All right. So, how do we do this better? How do we actually communicate gratitude in a way that is going to be important? And again, I want to say gratitude's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything. Um, we do, it doesn't heal everything. So if stress or caregivers are having trouble perceiving their siblings' gratitude because of those overwhelming levels of burden and stress, like gratitude can help, but it's not going to totally overcome that. So I don't want you to leave this lecture and be like, gratitude, 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 but instead see it as a piece of a puzzle toward healing, toward good things, toward positive relationship, toward happiness. All right, so how do we do it well? All right. Research on gratitude has a number of things to say about this, actually. That when we want to cultivate gratitude, we need to say it frequently. So it's not enough to just occasionally tell your mom, "Hey, mom, I appreciate everything you do for me." That's it needs to happen more often than that, and it needs to be said better than that. So, "Hey, I appreciate everything you do," is kind of a cop out. It's kind of a way of just saying, like, "I know you do a bunch of stuff for me, but I'm not really sure what." So instead, it's way more effective. That quality gratitude comes in when you say it well, when you're specific. You say, "Mom, you made me a hot breakfast every day before school when I was growing up. And I know that was a sacrifice for you. And it meant a lot to me. And it set me on a road toward health. And I so appreciate that." Now, you can only do that though if you're actually genuine about it. If it's really something that you are appreciative of, which means then that sometimes you have to do some digging in some relationships. There may be some relationships in your life where you don't really feel a lot of gratitude. But I would venture to guess that if you really sat and thought about it, you could find something. So being timely, it's better to offer gratitude shortly after someone's done something, but it's never too late at the same time. I actually just sent an email to someone who I knew 20 years ago, who was my small group leader in junior high youth group. And she'd come up in conversation with a friend, and I had was talking with that friend and saying that she was one of the first people who really got me sort of critically thinking about my faith. And I was like 13. And it's been 20 years and it's still influential. So I emailed her and I said, "Gosh, thank you, for being willing to do that work back then." And she emailed back and was really affected by it. So it's never too late, but usually the closer you can to something is really important. So you also want to, when you're expressing quality gratitude, you're acknowledging their intentions. You're acknowledging that it was an intentional act, that this woman in my life from a long time ago was intentionally serving junior high students. She was only like 19, maybe 20, but she was intentionally taking her time to serve and pour into junior hires with the hope of making an impact. So she did. Um, But we also don't always say gratitude for other people. Sometimes we say it for ourselves because it's good for us. And that's important too. You can say it to people who seem down, and it is a guarantee that it will at least add a moment of goodness for them. You can say it to people whose help that you need. Now, that sounds a little bit manipulative, right? Like, if I want you to do something for me, I'm going to express gratitude. And perhaps that can be abused. But at the same time, we know that we need help from people. And we also know that we're more likely to offer help when we are helped, that we're more likely to offer gratitude when we're receiving gratitude. So why not? If you know that you need help, like in the case of caregivers and their family siblings, why not say, "You know what? I really appreciated the time that you took um, mom to her doctor's appointment. That meant so much to me that you helped me out with my normal routine." Maybe you're saying that with the hope that your sister or brother will do that again, but that's better than just being like, "Why don't you help me more?" Right? So there's a little bit of ethical consideration that needs to happen there, but it does work. So, gratitude also importantly, while it does need to be expressed verbally, it's not always expressed verbally. So, other ways of doing that would be offering gifts. People in some research studies perceive, so one of my other research studies looked at caregivers and how they experience gratitude, and they talked about feeling thanked when someone followed through on their promise of help. So if the sibling said, hey, you know what? I'll take mom to my house for 2 weeks and give you a break. And they actually did. That felt like to the caregiver an expression of gratitude, an expression, a way of saying, like, hey, we're going to relieve your burden. Thank you so much for what you do. But also, gratitude is perceived as the antithesis of criticism. So think about that for a second. If criticism is a way that we pick at another person and say, you're not enough, you're not doing enough, um, gratitude is the opposite. Instead, it's saying, what you did mattered. What you did was enough. What you did was good. And so criticism tears down gratitude. So when we offer criticism, it's perceived really as an opposite experience. So it's important then, like, again, if you're thinking about a relationship that you want to transform, to be balancing those things. Criticism isn't always a wrong act, but it's often not helpful, and it's often going against that nature of gratitude, which is so helpful. So there's a few different things that you can do to practice gratitude better. Um, Research indicates that gratitude journaling is one of the most positive things that you can do for your mental health. And one of the simple practices like that is to just jot down 3 to 5 things a day or a week that you're thankful for. Um, Another practice from research is just to write down 3 good things that happen in the day. Not even necessarily things that you're immediately grateful for, but just 3 good things. And from those good things, then say why those things were good. And so, just for instance, I might say, my kid was really happy when I dropped them off at school today. And that was a good thing. And then when I started thinking about why was that a good thing? Well, my kid was happy to be dropped off because he loves his teacher. And he loves his teacher because she works really hard to care for her students. And suddenly I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who's co-parenting with me, basically. So you write down 3 good things and then you think through, why are those good things in my life? And it almost inevitably leads you back to another person or another thing that is in some way contributing positively to your life and that you can be grateful for those things. Um, we can also do what's called a mental relationship subtraction, which is basically sort of imagining your life without different relationships. So, what would it be like in my life if my mom wasn't here? Whoa. What would it be like in my life if my roommate wasn't who they are? And maybe for some of you, you're like, that would be great. But for the good relationships, if you can kind of do this sort of mental practice of imagining the loss of that, there is a gratitude that occurs because of that. So you'll see there a connection between gratitude and loss. And I just want to kind of touch on our last unit on grief, that grief carves out sort of a deeper well in our lives that can be filled down the road with deeper gratitude. It can be filled with deeper joy, deeper hope, because it's sort of carved something out of us. And that's painful, but it leaves room, and it leaves room for gratitude. And that is potentially a really beautiful thing. So another practice here is mindfulness. And mindfulness is simply the act of being aware of your thoughts, non-judgmentally, just noticing what you are thinking and physically feeling, the things that are around you. And most likely, as you do that, what research indicates is that you're more likely to be mindful of the fact that, like right now, I'm sitting in my own home on a comfortable couch and looking out at a really lovely yard. And today, I know that not everyone has that circumstance, that there's people who lost their homes this week all over the state, people that I know and love. And I can't not be grateful for that if I'm mindful enough to just take a moment to look at my circumstances. And then finally, thank you notes are a really, really effective way to both allow ourselves to experience gratitude, but to communicate them. So a good thank you note is, of course, addressed like a standard letter. Um, when you write it, though, a lot of us kind of agonize about like, what do I say? So as you write them, just don't worry about your grammar or spelling, just get the point out. But if be specific about the behavior that you're thanking that person for and tell them how it affected your life. So it's not enough to just say, hey, mom, thanks for those warm breakfasts. That was great. Okay, that's nice and she'll appreciate it. But instead to say, mom, I saw that you sacrificed every morning to cook us pancakes or eggs or whatever. And that showed me how to take care of other people, showed me um, how to love my kids, and it showed me how to build a healthy breakfast every morning, how to live a balanced life. So, something like that is very clearly saying, here's what you did, and here's how it has touched me, here's how it's affected me. And then talk about one of the ways that you can do this well is to talk about how often you remember that effort. So, I think of you every time I make breakfast for my kids. Or, of course, you're not saying that because none of you have kids yet, um, but you might say, like, I think of this often whenever I have lousy breakfasts in the cafeteria or something like that, whatever it's going to be. And then, if it's possible, it's really great to deliver it in person if you can, and let them see that you're okay with them seeing your heart in that. So a lot of people will write thank you notes and send them and then like not sort of hide because it's a little uncomfortable. But if you can be vulnerable enough to let that connection happen naturally, it's a good thing. And then finally, one of the sort of research interventions that looks at gratitude, positivity, and ways that it can help our lives is writing thank you notes once a week for about 6 weeks. So just 6 thank you notes that can make a really big impact on your personal happiness as the writer, let alone affecting the people in your network in really positive ways. So let me encourage you to do that. I believe it is part of your journal prompt for this week. So, yeah, that's all I have for you. I pray that you all have wonderful Thanksgivings, truly, that in this season of chaos and disruption and grief and pain and confusion, that you would have a moment to be grateful, to sit with those that you love, and to really experience real gratitude, that you would focus on the voluntary, the costly, and the intentional nature of those people's love in your life. And that I would also hope that you would look to your faith and see the same way that God is a voluntary God. He's an intentional God, and He gives us costly things, including the life of His Son. So, with that, I just send you into the holiday with blessing. I'm going to sign off on lecture for this class until I see you in person, which I'm very much looking forward to. So I hope you all are well and that you have a great holiday. Goodbye.